This is E&P Audio, a service of Editor and Publisher Magazine. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing.
Welcome back for a new episode of E&P Reports, the official podcast from the staff of Editor and Publisher Magazine. I'm your host, Bob Andelman. This week, we bring you two timely and informative conversations with news industry leaders. First up, 2019 E&P Publisher of the Year, P.J. Browning, publisher of the Post and Courier in Charleston, South Carolina, talks with E&P Editor-in-Chief New Yang about what it's like being a publisher today. They also get into what it was like winning the ultimate recognition from the news publishing industry in the same year that Browning coped with a major cancer diagnosis. After that, Jed Williams, Local Media Association's Chief Strategy Officer, takes questions from E&P Managing Editor Evelyn Mateos about the Google News Initiative Subscriptions Lab. They also talk about critical publisher benchmarks for digital subscription success. But first, here's New Yang with 2019 E&P Publisher of the Year and our November cover story leader, P.J. Browning. New?
Congratulations to P.J. Browning of the Post and Courier in Charleston, South Carolina for being E&P's 2019 Publisher of the Year. Congratulations, P.J.
Thank you.
What was your reaction like when you found out that you were Publisher of the Year?
I was very, very excited and humbled. You know, the team has worked really hard, so my assistant was the one that told me that I'd won. At first, I thought maybe she was kidding, and then I was like, who nominated me? And of course she wouldn't tell me, but it was really exciting news. It's just been an incredible year, so I really, really appreciated it.
That's great, because we had over 100 nominations this year, Publisher Year, and you definitely stood out, and the work that Post and Courier is doing definitely stood out this year. So how can you describe maybe what's a typical workday like for you there at the Post and Courier in the paper?
Yeah, I love this job because I say no day is the same. But this has been an incredible year. But I would just say that, I think that day to day, I spend a lot of time with the directors. We spend, certainly time in meetings. I wish we could find a way to do away with meetings. But, I think we spend a lot of time on our strategies. We spend a lot of time. We definitely have a roadmap that we follow. As we try to look for sustainable journalism and the different models that, we're trying here and what's going to work. But I'm a hands-on person, and I think the directors would tell you that we run pretty fast here, and we like to stay busy, but we've got a lot of really good things going on. So definitely engaged in a variety of things.
And digital is definitely, for a newsroom your size, digital is really a big factor in that. Can you talk about that journey of how digital started? I know you guys are part of the Google Labs, table stakes. Can you talk about how that started, going digital, and how that's such a big portion focus of your business?
Yeah, I would say digital is, we really, a couple of years ago, we looked at where revenues were going for traditional advertising and certainly circulation models. But for our market, when we looked at digital and where we needed to go, we looked at that roadmap, and we said that if we had 20,000 digital subscribers, we felt like we could create a very sustainable model. So we were a little ahead of the curve in thinking about road mapping and figuring out what that meant. But then when table stakes came along, and I tell everybody, on many levels, it was one of the most frustrating experience, but it was good because we were growing as a team. So the frustration really came in thinking about things differently. And, they said culture. Well, I can't say that enough. And I tell people today that table stakes is not one of those things that you go through that program and then you put it on the shelf, the book on the shelf, and you don't look at it. Because to do it right, we really have to transform the newsroom into really thinking digital. So I would say table stakes was very key to us. And one of the things that my editor and I both walked out of that meeting, and I looked at Mitch and I said, Mitch, it feels like to me everything that we learned today, that growing digital subscriptions needs to sit in the newsroom and not in circulation. And, he looked at me, and then it was like, he got it. He was like, what
like a
we
light
heard
bulb
today.
off, right?
Yeah.
It was like
It-
bobbing up his head. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think we were probably pretty early in adopting a whole different culture and organizational chart in that we put the digital subscriptions, growing them, everything is in our newsroom, and really teaching the newsroom that culture of, how stories play was very important to us. We were assigned, Dallas Morning News was our mentor as we were going through table stakes. So we learned a lot from them. And then I think just the next generation for us was being able to be selected to go into the Google News Subscriptions Lab, which that has added just a whole new dimension. We've got FTI Consulting working with us, and it's really been amazing. And I think my biggest takeaway from that is there's a lot of metrics, and we used to say, we were just swimming in data. And I still hear publishers say that there's so much data that how do you know what to focus on? And I think that what FTI and Google has brought to us, the headline would be there's really 16 key metrics. And, out of those 16 metrics, not all of them are created equal. There's 3 or 4 that we really focus on. And I think it's just the discipline of helping us decide what's going to move the lever faster and what's most important. And then what needs to, it's great, but you put it on your 2 or 3 year roadmap, and when you get to it, that's going to be fine. So it's been key.
Oh,
yeah.
That's great. And I want to talk about, being a publisher and kind of going to a newsroom and saying, hey guys, we're going to invest in digital and start looking at analytics and data. And you mentioned some of the frustration. What was that like, kind of, being a publisher, they're going to look at you and expect you to be excited, pumped up for it. Was that kind of like your mentality of like, if I'm excited, they'll be excited? Or what was that transition like for them?
Yeah. I mean, but then again, I say it's the newsroom, and, they're a cynical bunch, which is great. I want them to be, they're that way for a reason. But at the end of the day, one of the things that, I came back to, so I always said, the common sense of all of this is that we write stories because we want people to read them.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really resonated. So talking to the newsroom, not necessarily about, your numbers need to be higher. It was more about, if you have this audience, and you don't expect everybody to read every story, but you don't expect, a handful of people to read the hard work that you put into a story. So being able to educate them on what stories people want to read and what resonates with them, I would say by and large, that group has transitioned really, really well. One of our more senior reporters, who is a top performer, he's been more excited about this program, and it's been really great to see that he's been so excited. We put him out, coming out of table stakes, we developed many publisher groups, and one of the many publisher groups, that was all cross-divisional. So it would have marketing, advertising, news. And what was really cool is he came up to me one day in the lunchroom, and he was talking to me about all these great ideas that came out of his table stakes team and the mini publisher group. He was talking about all the revenue potentials, and I was like, wow, this is really cool.
Is this someone from the newsroom talking about that?
Yeah. So I think, it all resonated that there was, the end goal was to get readers engaged, and also to find those avenues that would be new revenue models for us. So it's been really cool.
It's kind of like at the end of the day, it's about the success of your publication, and that's what they all want, right? No matter what department you're working, they get that. So
yeah.
And well, you keep talking about the word roadmap too. So that could be a buzzword for a lot of publishers. What does a roadmap mean for you guys?
Yeah, for us, I would say we're pretty strict when we talk about our roadmap, and we've defined it. We really stick to it. And, when you think about a roadmap, we have a direction, and that roadmap is the direction to sustainable journalism. Not that we might not have to take an exit early and reroute once in a while, but it truly is. Yeah. It truly is a roadmap. And what we try to do, when you think about the roadmap, I would just say, if we're headed to Atlanta, we don't want to head towards Florida. So, it's staying away from anything that could be distracting. While it might look great, if it doesn't really send us in the direction that we need to go, then it's not a part of our roadmap. And for us, we really have outlined that in the next 5 years, what we want that to look like.
Okay. Oh, why 5 years? Is it just a number you thought would be you could work with, or?
We looked at where we really thought our print circulation and print advertising revenues and even preprint revenue, and we mapped it out over 5 years when we really thought we would start seeing even, maybe a non-existent preprint revenue. And while that may be hard to believe, as the industry changes, it impacts all of us. So if you have a publicly held company or two that might be thinking, less than daily, perhaps they're going to cut a couple of days a week. I think as you see that happening, and maybe as you see some companies leaning towards going more digital only, then, marketers for those major retailers will have to change their strategy. And we often say they're not going to print preprints just for Charleston, South Carolina. Yeah. So I think we just want to be prepared if that's the case. And we think it could be in 5 years.
Okay. And talking about that too, I know as a publisher, a lot of things they kind of have to ponder is what do they go after next? You mentioned, not chasing after the wrong things. So what is you as a publisher, what have you kind of focused on? How do you not chase after the wrong things? And how do you keep track? And is this roadmap part of that?
Yeah. And, it's hard because you do, even going to conferences, which I love, and I love to see the successes that people are having. For us, not chasing the shiny new penny is hard because you do have to say no, but we really stay really focused on digital subscriptions and where we need to go. We write journalism. We believe we write good journalism, but we do that with the reader in mind. So that's our first and foremost focus, is to have a sustainable journalism plan. And so that's, above all, that is the most important thing that we can accomplish, is to make sure we sustain really quality journalism in South Carolina.
Great. And speaking of your next shiny thing, steeplechase, that's a big event. You guys are going big with events. And can you talk about what steeplechase is and why is that event so important to you guys in Charleston?
Yeah, and I should have said, as a part of our roadmap, we really have digital subscriptions. That's very key. And then on what you would say more the traditional advertising side, events is one of the legs on the stool. And then really digital advertising agency is a piece that we work on. But events for us, I will tell you, we've learned, we've been doing events for a while now, and we learned that, that small event takes as much time as the large event. So we've really focused on 3 or 4 large events, and steeplechase is a steeplechase. It's a sanctioned horse race, and we purchased steeplechase in January of this year. And so our first race is Sunday, so very exciting and hoping for good weather.
That's a pretty quick turnaround, January and November.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to it. And I would say, for us, steeplechase, it resonated with us, and Charleston has a lot of events, but one of the things we looked at was something that was sustainable over, multi-year. It was different than just a typical event that you might come to in Charleston. We felt like it also had the ability to grow based on the audience size it is today versus larger horse races. And, we did say that we'd like it to be the Kentucky Derby of Charleston, but, and it has a lot of really cool history. So the history of steeplechase in Charleston, the content around, there's a great narrative, there's great stories to be told. So a lot of the fun we're having with steeplechase is just all the really cool stories that go along with it. So it's been fun to market, and hopefully it's going to be a very exciting race.
Now, did you have to hire someone new for that, or is that something you had an events position already working on this, and it's brand new? It's a brand new revenue source. So how do you train someone to learn how to market a horse racing?
That's true. We actually hired a consultant that is helping us, that actually handles horse races. So we've learned a lot this year. And that consultant, hopefully that'll be a position that we won't need in a year or two. But on the advertising side and really marketing it and selling sponsorships, we have an events team. It's small, but we really have one main person that focuses on our events. And again, I would just say we've narrowed that down. Steeplechase, we have Bicycle Across South Carolina, Charleston's Choice. Those are our three really big events. But, when we talk a big event, our goal is to make sure that, can we get those to be what we call $1 million babies?
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what we want to focus on is the really big events.
So, if it wasn't a sure thing, you probably wouldn't have purchased Steeplechase. Is that correct? I'm assuming.
So what we looked at was the history, right, of Steeplechase and what had happened, and then we looked at where it was today, and it had a change in ownership and very little marketing support, and we looked at what are our capabilities and what are we good at. And certainly the marketing and the telling the great stories. And we just felt like for us, it was a no-brainer. And we're really excited to see if we can make this into a really cool race. Hopefully everybody will be coming to Charleston. Everybody's going to want to steeplechase. So.
Do you already have a hat for Sunday?
Do. Yes. I know I've never owned a Kentucky Derby style hat, but I was online searching, and then we have a couple of local people here that make hats, and it was so cool. There's like feathers all over the place, so it ought to be an entertaining picture.
Yeah, that would be fun. Can you talk about some of your proud moments at the paper? One of the things we highlighted in the feature story is the Pulitzer you guys won in 2015, and you guys have been a finalist, every year since then. But yeah, can you talk about what was it like in your newsroom when you found out you won the Pulitzer and the story that you guys did for that?
Just you saying it out loud, it just gives me goosebumps again. It was really, really unbelievable, and I mean there was tears, clapping, but it was the proudest moment by far, and that was such a great story for the newsroom because that came out of the list that we get year after year after year that says, okay, South Carolina, you're in the top 10, you're in the top 3 consistently of women abused by men, and you just run the list. You're always running the list. And then it was our projects team, we asked the question, why are we always on that list? And then the credit goes to not only the journalists that worked on the project, but I would just say the survivors, because that for them to be able to tell their story, to give us, the time that they gave us, the video that we were able to capture, and just incredible stories. But it was really from those survivors that made that story possible and made a difference in South Carolina. So it was really some touching journalism, but it was unbelievable. We were so very, very proud of the news team. It was a hard story to tell.
Yeah, and as most publications, you need to have that team that's dedicated to doing that kind of long-form journalism, investigating. So as a publisher, is that way kind of like pre-research is done? You see why you need this kind of having to pull a journalist to work on this series. It probably took months, correct, to put together.
Yes. And I think that's what we do really good. When I talk about content, I get really passionate about content. I think newspapers have to stay in that content where we can make a difference in the communities in which we live. And I think that's our sweet spot. But we tell good stories and we write good journalism, and I think that's what makes a difference to people. I really do.
And also in 2015, there was also the Emmanuel Church, the church shooting that occurred there in Charleston. And again, that was having a newsroom come together. And, unfortunately, we're seeing more and more communities and newsrooms having to cover these kind of situations. What was it like in your newsroom when that day was like? And as a publisher, how were you there for your newsroom when that occurred?
Yeah, so just an unbelievable story too, and you always think those things can't happen in your backyard, but our journalists and our employees, we're a part of the community. Certainly, I think being family owned too, that's notched up a degree or two because we're such a part of the community. that, it's your neighbors. And I remember one of our lead project reporters, it was basically happened behind his house, and he's flip-flops and shorts running over there, and you're just in the moment getting the stories, and it's just so emotional. But our team did a good job covering that. I think there was a lot of trust. I think that there is trust in the community with the newspaper, because they know we're not sensationalizing. We're here to tell the story, and we're not the national news that's here just for the story and then they're gone the next day. We are going to be here that day after, and to continue to help the community heal. And certainly, from my perspective, it's supporting the journalists. They're emotionally going through so much as they're covering a story like that, and just knowing that whatever they need, we're here for them. They're going to need extra time to heal too, because they've seen a lot. They've just been exposed to a lot of really raw emotion. But that what was so great was Jennifer Berry Hawes was able to. She was one of our lead reporters, but she also was able to write a book afterwards, which I don't think we would have been able to write that book and tell that story without the family members really trusting in Jennifer and the Post and Courier. So that was telling too. But it was it's a part of our history now in this community. But it was something that is
that book is also the book revenue. You talk about that as well. That's going towards internships, correct, at the paper?
Yeah. So, that was very important to us too. We wanted to write the book and to be able to tell the story. And certainly we felt like Jennifer was the best person, but we did not in any way, shape, or form want to be seen as profiting off that book. So the money that we received while we paid Jennifer and one of our editors some money out of that, most of that fund went to fund a internship for African-American students within our newsroom. So we felt like that was a really good purpose and to be able to give back.
That's great. That's great. You talk about being there for your staff during this time, but also, we talked a bit of the story as well. You just recently were diagnosed with ovarian cancer last year in 2018, and you came back to office this year. You were out for 8 weeks, but the newsroom was there for you as well too. Can you talk about what was that like when you received the news, but coming back to work, ready to get back to work? That's what they told me, was like you're ready to roll up your sleeves and get back to where you were doing before. So.
Yeah, I mean, wow, nobody expects to have that kind of diagnosis. So it was certainly a shock, but my gosh, my team was amazing. And, they know that my passion is work. I love being here. I love being in the moment of everything that we have going on. And, they were so great. I would say they left me alone that first week, as I went through surgery. And I did tell them, I was like, please don't send me anything that's an important decision that's going to get me in trouble while I'm on my meds, But coming out of it, I mean, I would get calls from them and, like daily emails keeping me updated. And so they were fantastic. And what I felt so bad about is, I mean, we're in hurricane season of all things. I come out of surgery and it's like the next week we have a hurricane coming through, but we have a great plan, and they were so nervous about it. So I would dial into the, emergency calls that we have 3 times a day. They had it all together. They did a great job, and they were so supportive of me. And they also, they fed me, knew that they needed to feed me information. I think they helped me heal because I would have been so incredibly bored. But they were amazing, really, really amazing.
I mean, it's a testament of your leadership, because they're ready, to be there for you, and also just to pick it up when you're in the hospital. So it's a testament of your leadership.
Yeah, they were just awesome.
Yeah, awesome. Good. You've been in the business for more than 30 years. Congratulations.
Yeah.
What kind of can you talk about what's it like being a woman and working in the media industry, and especially as a publisher?
Yeah. Oh, well, over the years, and again, it'll be 36 years in January.
Yeah.
So a long time. But, when I started out in the business, there were a lot of white males in the business, bottom line. And, the boardrooms would be the pictures of white males. So I would say I have some really great mentors that Larry Whitaker is one, and just really good mentors that helped me along the way. And Larry was one of those people that said, just make sure that the training that you need, you have to ask for it, because he said, I'm not going to be that person that tells you you need to do something. He said, you have to see that you want to do that. And, if there's training available, then he said, happy to send you, but it's got to come from your heart. And if you want to do it, then you'll be successful at it. So I really appreciated that advice. But, my fun times over the years is always everybody thinks it's Mr. P.J. Browning. So that's always been fun to say, yes, this is her.
Yeah, I get that too with New Gain. So I both.
Yeah, so I guess it's, probably originally a male dominated, and now we have a lot more females in the business, which I love. Because I always said I'm not a great golfer. I'll go out and golf, and I do believe a lot of golf happens on the golf, or a lot of business happens on the golf course. But so now I've learned over the years, it doesn't matter if I'm a bad golfer, because people don't really expect me to be a good golfer. But I really, have fun talking to clients and people. There's some great stories to be had. So it's something that I encourage all my female managers and executives to take part in.
Mm-hmm. I guess if you could give yourself, like younger self, some advice, what would you tell yourself? Yeah.
Oh, wow. You just, you never expect. It's been interesting. My dad gave me the advice. I actually came from a family of teachers, and I originally thought, oh, well, I think I want to be a teacher. And I remember my dad just saying, whatever you do, you just need to make sure that you love doing it. And I would say, for me, and coming out of college, while I was in college, I took everything from, I was going to be a journalist to I was going to go into business law because I loved the First Amendment. And then, I took a marketing class, and I was like, oh, this is fascinating. This is what makes people tick, why they do the things that they do. So, for me, I tell students today, and I told my kids the same thing. It's not important for you to really know what you want to do. I think it's more important for you to explore different things and, what really makes you happy, because we spend a lot of time at work. It's my second family. So, I just think, be open to ideas and explore what's really going to make you happy.
And can you share your story about how you got started in the news industry? I love hearing that story too.
Yeah. Yes. So I came from a newspaper reading family, and, it was mom and dad and my brother, who's older than me, and dad would read this front section of the paper. My mom would read the features section of the paper. She was a stay-at-home mom, and I believe that's really the hardest job around for women. And then my brother would read the sports, and I always got thrown the classified section. It's like, you read this, and it was quiet time, especially on the weekends. It was quiet time, and you read the paper. And I could read, I could tell you, I could spell like nobody's business. So I just was used to reading the classifieds. And one day there was a 3-line classified ad, and it said classified advisor wanted, apply in person, Springfield News Leader. It was 3 lines, short and sweet. And I told my mom, I said, oh my gosh, this is like the perfect job for me, part-time. And so I went in, that was on Sunday, and I went in on Monday morning. I was there at 8:00. And Dorothy Gardner was my first official boss, but she interviewed me that morning, and I filled out my little application, and she asked me if I could start that afternoon. So I went to class, came back, and started at 1:00 that afternoon, and took classified ads. But that was my start.
That story proves that classifieds do work.
They do work. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Looking at yourself now, can you describe what today's publishers are going through? How do you kind of keep your head in the game and motivate yourself as a leader?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, because publishers today are up against a lot, and we're in a fight. And I think we're defining, the cool thing is we're going to define the next generation. I think, our biggest challenges are that it's going to be different. And culturally, when I look at us, and I keep coming back to our organization and, the resources that we have fewer resources, most of us, trying to do more. And, you hear the old saying, okay, well, you got to figure out what you can't do or what you stop doing. And I think publishers today, we really have to look through that lens of what is your roadmap and what is your goal? And are you seriously putting the resources in the right place? Because it is so hard for us to take resources that have been doing things and reassign them. Yeah. And I was at a conference the other day, and I was listening to somebody, and I wrote myself a note, and I said, we've got a lot of very smart people in our organization, and I need to always remember that people want to do a good job, and I don't think that they're afraid of learning new skills. I think sometimes we define people in the little area of expertise. We define them as always being in that square box. So I think really publishers have to realize what are the resources needed, and do I have them within my own organization, and can I retrain people? But it's different. It's absolutely different today.
It kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, was having to train your newsroom about digital. You're able to not keep them inside a print box, but take them and challenge them to think outside the box, right? So
absolutely. And I think people by and large, I know our group is a hardworking group, and they want to define success. And we recently have made some changes in our pre-press area and our page one design, and really got them more involved in writing our headlines and optimizing and learning what it means to optimize headlines. So it's been really cool to see them learn a new skill, and it's good for them. I mean, it makes them more marketable. So we're excited about that, but we have to take the time to retrain people too. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's definitely a lot of hard work you guys are doing there, but you guys should have time for fun too. And I want to hear about what you do for fun. Especially
Yes, I think I shared in the magazine too that my fun, that's so easy for me because we have a mini farm, and I love, I say the animals don't talk back to me. I'm one of those collaborators here, and I'm always asking people their opinion, and I patiently take that all in. But it's so nice to go out, and the animals, I can talk to them and they don't talk back. But we've got 8 chickens, and we have Festus, who is our miniature donkey, and then we have 3 micro miniature cows. I could say 3 mean kitties, 3 cats that were feral. And there are 3 brothers, so we call them the mean kitties. But it's just a fun environment, and it's just so relaxing to go out there and mess around with the animals.
Now, most publishers wait till they retire to get a farm, and you have a farm now. So, do you see yourself retiring, or are you kind of in it for the long haul?
I hope. If my health holds, which hopefully that will, but, I really hope I'll be 55 on Thanksgiving Day. I'm going to be a turkey this year.
Happy early birthday.
Yeah. So I'll be 55, and hopefully, I'll be able to work another 10 years. I'm anxious to see that. For me, that sounds like a long time, and I can't imagine, how we're going to just further define what we are as a news organization. But it's an exciting time. It's a lot of hard work right now, with what the industry is going through. But, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm excited to help lead our organization through that tunnel.
Definitely. And we definitely need more publishers like you, PJ, who see that light in the tunnel. And we just want to say, congratulations again on being named the Publisher of the Year, and all the hard work you guys are doing at the Post and Courier. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on it.
Thank you. We appreciate it, and we sincerely have enjoyed this. It's just been a great journey for us, so thank you very much.
Next up, editor and publisher managing editor Evelyn Mateos shares her conversation with Jed Williams, Local Media Association's Chief Strategy Officer. If you're in news publishing and in search of best practices for the digital age, you've come to the right podcast today. Evelyn?
Thanks for joining us on E&P Reports, Jed. As I understand it, FTI Consulting and the Local Media Association partnered with Google News Initiative to develop a sustainable business model for local news. 2 of 3 planned industry research reports have been released so far. Is that correct?
That's right, Evelyn. It's good to be on with you. And that's exactly right. This is a 9-month intensive program between Google, LMA, and FTI. We'll work with 10 Metro daily newspaper publishers during the course of those 9 months on multiple phases of work. And we'll release multiple reports to the industry detailing what's happened, what's been learned, and what the impact is for the industry around digital subscriptions and a consumer-driven revenue model. And to this point, we've released 2 of the 3 reports.
Great. And could you share with us which newspapers are participating and how they were selected?
Sure. There are 10 total newspapers that are participating. We actually had a private application process at the very beginning of, putting together the Digital Subscriptions Lab, or the Subscriptions Lab, as we call it. Those publishers are really a mix. They're all daily newspapers, but we also wanted to have broad representation and diversity here. And what I mean by that is we're really testing the efficacy and the success rate of a digital subscriptions model for lots of types of publishers, not just a specific type with a particular ownership structure in a particular market size. We want to understand horizontally, broadly, how well a digital subscriptions model can work for all types of daily newspaper publishers. So we have some very large publishers like the Houston Chronicle from Hearst, Toronto Star, Baltimore Sun, which is part of Tribune Publishing, and then the Columbus Dispatch, part of Gatehouse Media. And then we have a number of sort of what I call mid and long tail, mid-size and smaller publishers, many of whom are private and independent. Companies like GFR Media, El Nuevo Dia in Puerto Rico, the Portland Press Herald in Portland, Maine, the Buffalo News, the Charleston Post and Courier, and then also the Idaho Press Gazette, which is part of Adams Publishing Group, as well as the Southeast Missouri and part of Rust Communications. So we've got an interesting mix of really large, significantly smaller, everywhere in between, and then a lot of ownership structures as well, so we can better understand how well a digital subscription model can work for any number of newspaper publishers in North America.
Yeah, so you definitely have a diverse group there. If you're looking at, if you were looking at, say, 2 local small newspapers, what made one appropriate versus the other one?
Absolutely. So I think there are a few things that we looked for. I mean, did a company need to have an existing digital subscriptions program? Yes, they did. We weren't starting from scratch. We were building upon an existing foundation. Now, of course, we didn't expect them to have the model completely figured out. Nobody really does per se. And the whole purpose of the lab is to work with them to expand and accelerate that digital subscriptions model. But I think having an existing model was one criteria. Another was, I think, having a certain level of data foundation, being a metrics-driven organization, being an organization that had a sense of here's how our business is performing, here's how we want to expand our business and diversify our revenue streams, and here's how we actually measure success. Here's how we're tracking that, and here's what success looks like to us. So measurability, KPI is important. Having a really solid, well-articulated, clear strategic roadmap important. For all of these publishers, having digital subscriptions and consumer-driven revenue as a top 3 strategic goal is essential. We're asking them to make a multiple-month, cross-functional, deep, robust commitment of time, resources, energy, focus, you name it. This has to be really important to their organization for it to move the needle for them the way we want and hope, and for them to make the commitment and carry out the commitment that we think is important. And I think the last point I would make connected to that is executive buy-in, championing involvement in this and robust participation at the highest C-suite level of an organization is imperative. Not just for a lab like this, Evelyn, but I think we see this in general with any type of industry initiative, any new experiment, anything that's non-traditional, innovation and entrepreneurial initiatives, that has to be led and championed at the executive level for it to really have a chance to thrive throughout a company at large. So we were very much looking for executive buy-in. And in fact, each of these 10 companies has an executive sponsor that's intricately involved in all 9 months of this program.
Great. Okay. So now I know all of these news publishers, they all applied, correct, to be a part of the lab. But did you find any that were maybe kind of hesitant, even though they applied? Hesitant to work with Google?
Sure. I mean, I think there were questions. I mean, I think there were a couple of questions there. One was just sort of, what is this lab in general, right? It's not a traditional concept. We're not just getting together at conferences and having happy hour conversations or doing panel presentations. This is something that's very non-traditional. While Google and LMA have a relationship, and LMA and FTI have a relationship, and Google and FTI have a relationship, we had never brought these groups together this way to put on a lab of this kind. So it was very much a unique first of its kind concept. So I think just helping to give them a comfort level of what this is, what it meant to their business, that it was a comfortable place for them to experiment and to be really open and honest, not just with their own organization, but with others like them, and build that peer group and share with that peer group. You have to build some warmth around that. I think with the question about Google, and it's an understandable question, we get that. And Google was very upfront that I think one of the biggest points Google made was, we are not just funding this, we're also here to help with technology and product resources, with services, with embedding teams, to help make this project more effective for your publication, and that Google is not getting any direct access to your data. FTI is the manager of the data here. FTI and LMA are the ones that are going through and doing the benchmarking and doing the reports. Google doesn't own that data and wouldn't have direct access to that data in any way. They are here to subsidize and then find additional ways strategically to empower the publishers. And I think when that message was delivered clearly, everybody really warmed up to like, okay, there's some really unique benefit to being involved in this sort of collaboration.
Yeah, I'm sure that definitely lended a little bit of ease there. So now getting into the first report, Critical Publisher Benchmarks for Digital Subscription Success. How were these benchmarks that you kind of used to understand the overall performance for these publishers, how were those kind of selected?
Yeah, I mean, it was really a collaborative process. I mean, I think FTI Consulting and Pete Doucette, who's the FTI lead on this project, who's terrific and brings great, deep knowledge of the consumer revenue and digital subscription space, he and his team took the lead in sort of building out a pyramid or kind of an entire table of metrics that we thought could be important. And then we reviewed those as a team between Google and FTI and LMA and said, look, I think one of the most important things about this report, Evelyn, is we want to stress the importance of data centricity, of data being the fuel for your digital subscriptions efforts. But we don't want people to be so awash in data points that it becomes confusing or that there's paralysis by data analysis, right? So how do we pick, I think to your question, the right set of data points that are enough to be meaningful, enough to tell a full audience journey story from traffic at the top of the funnel to engagement to conversion and then to retention, without bombarding publishers in the industry so much that they don't know exactly what data points should be most important. So that was our charter when we talked about this. And we ultimately came up with about 10 data points across that funnel or across that journey that we thought were most important. There are several others that we could have used that were sort of left on the cutting room floor. And in fact, when you look in the appendix, there's an entire glossary, not only of terms, but KPIs. So there's a whole set of numbers that we didn't even focus on in the report, but the core report has about 10 or so. And again, the key is to think about a subscriber journey, as a funnel from the very first touch point with a newspaper or local media brand, all the way to becoming a paying subscriber and then a loyal reader and an advocate. And how do we identify the most important critical KPIs at each stage of that funnel?
Yeah. And so were there any benchmarks that were difficult to settle on that maybe local media had to fight for or FTI had to fight for? Because I'm sure with all these different, companies, they each will see their most important benchmark.
Yeah, I actually was pleasantly surprised by this. I didn't think it was too difficult. I think there was really good consensus around this overall. I mean, I think that the smart thing that we did was, again, we took that funnel and we said, let's identify a core set of metrics that live at each stage of the funnel. So if we're talking about just overall traffic, are we talking about page views, unduplicated unique visitors? As we move into engagement, we're talking about things like number of newsletter subscribers, and then newsletter engagement, unique open rate, unique click-through rate. We're also talking about frequency of returning visitors, right? And then session time and depth and things like that. Doesn't mean we used all of these in the report. I'm just saying we were able to segment what the available and addressable metrics were at each stage of the funnel pretty cleanly. and then say, okay, what are the 2 or 3, let's say, that we think are most important at each stage or level of that funnel. So there wasn't a lot of, a lot of dispute or even that much back and forth. I think we settled on them pretty cleanly. I mean, you can look at something like pay flow conversion rate or paid stop conversion rate in terms of like the number of people that hit a paywall or a pay meter that actually go through and convert. And there are a lot of measures that are very close to that. We settled on something like paid stop conversion rate to be our definitive metric when it came to pay flow efficiency, but there are several others we could have used. So that's an example of going like, well, there are 3 or 4 in that area. They're closely tied together. We're going to focus on this one and make it our foremost for this report.
Gotcha. Okay. Were there any left on the cutting room floor, as you said, that you wish now, looking back, I wish that one would have made it?
No, because I think a couple of things. Like one, there's that full glossary. So people that go in and engage with the report can get a sense of what other metrics are available to them, what other metrics they might want to consider in their organization, how to define that, and thus how to find the right data sets for it. And also we have so much follow-up engagement with each of these publishers, both among each other as a cohort and then individually as they built out their roadmaps for short-term and long-term success. And now as they get into actually designing and implementing tests and experiments, that there are plenty of opportunities and touch points for us to work with them individually and as a group to go, okay, is there a different metric that you should be using to measure success based on a test or an experiment you're running? If so, great. Here's what that metric is. Here's how we define it. Here's how we can help you capture it and use it. And then from there, we could then report on that or that use case out to the industry. So it's the good news about the benchmarks report is it really was sort of the point of the spear to get everybody started in this project, to set up the roadmap work that followed. It's been a valuable resource to come back to, and it's something that we can organically build upon based on what the publishers are doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And were you surprised at all by how each publisher individually scored? Were there any that you thought, oh, I thought that was going to be way down here, but that ended up, being the best one?
No, not really. I think there were, for each of the metrics in the benchmarking report, there's a spectrum, and you're going to have publishers in this group that score or place across that spectrum. So I think one thing that was interesting is, like, generally speaking, it wasn't like somebody that was a laggard in one was a laggard in all. Yeah, so you had an interesting range where, like, some publishers performed really well in particular things, but they weren't always the highest performer in everything. And the same was true of the areas where they may have been challenged. And I think that points to the fact that, one, we feel good about the overall balance of the group, that there's, that overall they're at a fairly similar place or baseline to work from. And also that the challenges shared among these publishers and the ecosystem writ large are pretty common. Nobody's got it fully figured out. Publishers can help each other in different ways, and they all kind of fall within this spectrum. And how do we help them all move to the right on that spectrum? So I would just note that. I think the other thing, there were a couple of, maybe it wasn't so much surprises. There were some notables in terms of publishers that performed really well in key areas that give them great foundations to build upon. The Toronto Star, for instance, performs extremely well at meter stop rate. They're doing a great job of getting people to their paywall and to their pay meter, which is a critical engagement step on the path to conversion. Their next step is to move from high meter stop rate to higher conversion rate, right? The Houston Chronicle has done a wonderful job of building a newsletter database and then creating high engagement newsletters that drive high open rate, that drive high click-through rate. How can they continue to build upon that to drive more conversion? But I will isolate one that I think was probably, I know this company well, so it wasn't surprising for me personally, but I think for many that may not know them, it would have been surprising. And that is the Southeast Missourian is the smallest publication in the group. It's a single property, a daily in Southeast Missouri. Then it's got maybe, 10, 15,000 daily circulation, maybe a little bit bigger than that. And they performed the best out of any of the 10 publishers when it came to page speed and page load, and specifically when it came to mobile page speed. And, if Pete Doucette from FTI were on this with us, he would be talking about, page speed is a mindset. It's a way of life. It's something that media companies need to be focused on, because well over 50% of their traffic, maybe 70, maybe 80% of their traffic is coming from mobile users. You have to create a mobile-centric, mobile-first, delightful experience on that platform for those users to get to create stickiness within loyalty with your brand and give yourself the best chance to convert them into a paying subscriber. So page load and page speed tied to customer experience is just vital. And to see the Southeast Missourian, the smallest publisher in this cohort, perform the best, I think was eye-opening. And I think it should also be heartening to people listening to this podcast or people in the industry that go, I'm a small organization. Does that mean I'm handcuffed? Does that mean I can't do these things? These guys are really small compared to Houston or Toronto. And it doesn't mean the other guys are performing poorly. I'm just saying Southeast Missourian is dramatically smaller. And they're the outperformer when it comes to page speed because they've made a commitment to that being important to their organization.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think that page load is something that typically maybe for bigger organizations just falls through the cracks because they were pulled a million different directions? Is the conversation most of the time?
I think it can be. I think there are probably a lot of factors there. I mean, I think sometimes page speed and page load and overall customer experience can be as, when I say simple, I mean that as a relative term, can be as simple as the tension that exists within an organization between just the user experience for Jed or Evelyn as a user wanting to read and engage with content and the ad experience, right? And if you're bringing in a whole bunch of third-party programmatic advertising and third-party ad tags and ad calls and running a lot of Taboola and Outbrain and things like that, I get it. It creates revenue, but it also creates a drain or a strain on your user experience, and it slows down your page load. So there is that very real dilemma between user experience and advertising load and ad experience. That's one. I think another is just overall product sort of chops or competency within media organizations. And in fact, you and I may have even talked about this at some point in the past. Media organizations more than ever must think like customer-driven, customer-obsessed product organizations, right? And really build great product teams that know how to test experiences quickly, learn from them, iterate, test again, and really build a smart product roadmap. And I think you see it, media companies, particularly local media companies that are resource constrained, that don't necessarily have that DNA historically. That's a tough thing to just acquire. It takes time to build that. But I think one of the things where one of the kind of general lessons we're hopeful comes out of benchmarking and looking at page speed is that this is essential. And so building the product capabilities and then putting the customer at the center of your product design process really needs to be a mode of operating for media companies moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Right. Good. So now ultimately, what can news publishers reading this report, what can they learn about, how these other publishers scored and what practices they're putting in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly as you suggested. I think it's one thing to see how they scored and then sort of think about, well, I mean, if you have access to your own data, of course, or you're doing your own benchmarking, go, okay, I'm going to benchmark myself against these 10 publishers or against the average of the publishers in the cohort and the highest performers in the cohort to see how I did. But I think beyond that, I mean, that's important. That gives you a baseline. The next step is and so how did they do that or what are they doing about that? And that's why we tried to isolate not just kind of the overall cohort performance, the average performance for a KPI, but also shine a spotlight on a high performer, and not just to show their data, but also to give context on what they've done, why it's strategically important to them, what decisions they made as a result of that, what they've seen because of that, and maybe what they're doing next. So we really hope that context from high performers helps readers of this report. And I think the other thing that hopefully any reader can take out of this is just this notion of how to be a more data-centric, and I use this term a lot, and it's a strong word, but I mean it, data-obsessed organization. Data, your own intelligence about your audience has to be the foundation for your digital subscription strategy, for your product experience, for how you measure success internally, for how you articulate success to your teams. And so if this gives you more of a roadmap to building a more data-informed organization and using data as your foundation for decisioning, then that's a big win, aside from what any one publisher is doing, so that we can create a more universal data fluency when it comes to local publishers.
Right. Yeah, I definitely think, as you mentioned before, sometimes publishers will get hit with tons of data and it just seems, overwhelming. So now moving on to the second report, how can publishers progress toward a successful digital subscription model?
Yeah, this report it certainly brought in benchmarking. We did the benchmarking report first for a reason, because it's a kind of a precious resource we can keep coming back to and referencing. But this was really more about, okay, now you've got a data foundation. Now you understand where your digital subscription business is today. You understand more about your audience. How do you progress along the digital maturity curve from either being a laggard or sort of an upstart to being one that's more leading in the field when it comes to digital subscriptions? So I think this report was about helping publishers think about what that digital maturity curve is and specific things they can do and steps they can take to move themselves forward along the digital maturity curve. Ultimately, the big thing that we're talking about here is pure, true business transformation. That long term, you're moving from being probably more of an ad-centric or advertising-focused organization to, not exclusively, but certainly more of a consumer-focused organization. You're also in time, and this may be more accelerated or hastened than we thought, you're also moving from being a print-first organization to being a digitally minded and digitally native organization, not just in terms of digital revenues and digital subscription, but also a digital-first mindset. So that's the overall business transformation that we're pointing to here, and moving farther along that digital maturity curve enables that. So this was really a look at the key foundations or pillars or tenets, whatever you want to call it, that underpin that movement along the digital maturity curve. And that really falls into three areas: people, process, and technology. And understanding how to build strong foundations in each of those three, and understanding how each of those three must work together for you to really innovate from within and transform your business through a customer first and a customer revenue centric mindset. So that was the overall kind of premise or goal of the report.
Great. Yeah. And I know one of the points that's also in there, or questions, I guess I should say, is how do publishers know that they're on the right path, which I would love to get into here. As publishers read the first report, go through the second one. How do they know that they are on the right path?
Yeah, and I think some of this is, again, data-driven, and I think some of this is a little bit more qualitative or anecdotal. So I think the simplest, kind of most blunt answer I can give is, you're on the right path if you're setting a clear set of goals, you're articulating those across your company, you know exactly how you want to measure them, and you're very disciplined and diligent about measuring them to then understand how you're doing. And you use that to then iterate and continue to test and change and move quickly, right? So data is really, again, the crux of being able to do that. But within this also, as we talk about people, process, and technology, this also comes back to things like, do you have the right people on the bus? Have you built cross-functional collaboration where everybody understands why digital subscriptions are so important to your business, and their success is tied to digital subscription success in some way? They're incentivized, they're motivated, they're working together. One thing we've talked with a lot of the participating publishers about when it comes to specific tests or experiments they're running is this notion of building mission-focused teams. And that means cross-functional. That means bringing different departments together: audience and marketing, maybe finance, perhaps revenue, certainly newsroom and editorial, but having a mission-focused group of people that really can almost operate like a mini publisher, to use table stakes language, that can focus on that particular test or experiment or roadmap item, that really own that, but also own it cross-functionally. So it's not just living with the product team or the audience team, but each of those specific people can go back to their teams and articulate and socialize what's happening within the organization. So there's that constant communication of what's happening, what it means, why you should care, what you can do about it. That's the notion of people and process that's so important here. And I think the last thing I would mention, and it ties into some other things I've said here, how do you know that you're on the right path? This is more qualitative, but internally, have you built a sort of test and learn culture that embraces rapid development and learning and iteration? and isn't afraid of, sometimes tests going differently than you thought, or to kind of use the cliche that's out there in industry, fail fast, fail forward, right? Fail fast, fail forward, learn quickly, and move forward. And that's really what we're going for in this last phase of the Subs Lab now, which is, moving from building roadmaps to actually doing testing and experimentation. It allows publishers to get wins, but it also teaches them, we hope, culturally, intrinsically, what it means to be more of a product and audience-led company that isn't afraid to experiment, test quickly, learn, try again, move faster, move smarter, and make less expensive mistakes. That's a key point I would make. So if you, as a publisher, if you read this and you read about why we think testing and learning is so important and how to do it, and you think to yourself, yeah, I do this within my organization, or we're in a position to do this, that's a win. That means you're on a path to becoming a more nimble organization that can transform more effectively.
Yeah, and you're kind of getting into my next question here with, getting into publishers that might be scared of the test and the data. How do you answer objections from resistant or, maybe skeptics? Resistant publishers, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it's true. It's out there. Change is hard. Change is scary. Particularly when, if we're talking about media companies in general and specifically local newspapers, your business is under assault. Your business is changing like sand under your feet, right? And now, you're going to ask me, LMA or FTI or Google, to go out and make a bunch more radical changes to my business when nothing about my business feels solid right now, or I've just got to make month or make quarter. It's a really hard thing to ask. It's an even harder thing to do. And so I think what we're trying to do here is a couple of things. One, show the publishing community and the local media. It's beyond just publishers focused on subscriptions. I think it's any media company that is thinking about revenue diversification, that's thinking about dramatic change, that's thinking about business transformation. What are the toolkits that come out of a program like this that are applicable to your business, right? And so if we can show different examples of how publishers like yours, similar to yours, have done this, and make that accessible to you and your publication, that's a win. So that you can see, oh, wow, Portland, Maine has done this, or Charleston, South Carolina has done this. These are independent publications that are not huge, that have resource constraints like mine, like yours. How did they overcome it? How did they address it? Because they're dealing with similar headwinds and challenges that you are. So one is showing that path through the lens or the eyes of others. I think two is kind of what I was talking about a minute ago, really giving frameworks for how to do it. It's one thing to say Portland or Southeast Missourian or Buffalo or Columbus or Charleston has done it. It's another thing to say, okay, great. So I know it can be done in a market like mine. How do I actually do that? What does building a smart roadmap look like? How do I think about where to smartly, thoughtfully invest and where to run experiments or where not, and how to prioritize that pipeline? And so you see in the second report that you're referencing, and you see in a lot of the work that we do with the cohort now is around, again, how are you deciding what you want to test? How are you building that test? How are you quickly learning from that and iterating upon that and trying to do that within literally an 8 to 12 week cycle? So we're not talking about full year tests that are laborious and expensive, and by the time you've learned something, the puck has moved somewhere else. We're talking about 8 to 12 weeks so you can react to your business conditions, your market conditions, your audience conditions, learn quickly, and then tweak the dials. So teaching, again, this is teaching that whole practice of innovating and experimenting from within. It's something we're doing with the 10 now, and it's something we want to evangelize to the industry through reports and other ways.
And can you offer news publishers any advice on getting the most out of these reports? And, that might be a little bit of what you were getting into there, but anything to add to that question there?
Yeah, not a lot, but I'll give one example, maybe to make it even a little bit more, colorful or specific. So there's a fairly small daily newspaper group, family-owned in Connecticut, called the Record Journal. And they won't mind me mentioning this because I work closely with them, and I know their publisher, Liz White, very well. Hi, Liz. And, they were not in the Subs Lab, but they have really studied closely what's happening in the subscriptions lab. They've read the reports. Liz has distributed the reports to her teams. But the biggest thing that Liz has done is Liz has built a cross-functional consumer revenue team that brings together circulation, audience, newsroom, and social media engagement, and other functions. And that team is now like a high-performing little team within Record Journal. Now, those folks knew each other and they worked with each other in one-off ways before, but they'd never worked on a mission-based team like this that was obsessively focused on building out what are the most important metrics and strategies and goals for Record Journal when it comes to their revenue growth. And for them, number one, it's digital subscriptions, consumer revenue growth. And that's what that team is focused on. So somebody like Liz White in Record Journal took what's happening in the subscriptions lab and said, okay, I'm going to build a mission-focused team. We're going to set really clear goals and KPIs for what we want to achieve with digital subscriptions. We're going to build they built a whole consumer or audience KPIs dashboard. And now they've used that to guide any number of tests and initiatives and strategies that they're employing through that team. And they've grown subscriptions dramatically over the past year or so and have even stronger ambitions for the rest of this year and for 2020. So she's somebody that has taken this roadmap and said, we've already gotten started, but there's no reason we shouldn't be using these tools to go bigger and go faster. And that's exactly what they've done. So I would encourage others to follow Liz's lead and say, let's take benchmarks. Let's understand our data. Let's use that to instruct our goals. Let's think about how we can innovate and experiment more quickly and build that mindset. And that example from Liz is exactly what we're hoping to achieve.
And have you heard from any other publishers not in the program that have kind of opened up to data or adopted any of these, I know there's short-term planning, long-term planning that you had in the second report there. Anyone that has adopted this as a solution?
Yeah, I think just maybe less of a solution and more of a set of frameworks and a way of thinking that now shapes how their organization operates day to day and who's at the table and how they use data as a currency and how they experiment and how they build strategy and tactics. We've heard, I can tell you with the benchmarking report in particular, the response was overwhelming and really heartening. Whether it was Record Journal, who I talked about, or Shaw Media Group, or Swift Communications, or Gannett we heard from, and we heard from countless publishers, whether it was something as simple as this report is extremely valuable, we're using it in our meetings, we're using it to reevaluate what we measure, we're using it to make sure that we're accessing all the right data points, or it was publishers and leaders taking it 3 steps further and saying we're completely rebuilding what we do, or we're reevaluating our technology stack. We're looking at how to build teams differently. We're thinking through how to measure differently and how to use data differently within our organization. I think, Evelyn, there were layers to how this resonated with people and how they've utilized it. And I think that will continue to occur. This will be a process over a while. But the response we've gotten has been heartening, specifically around benchmarking and data, when people, I think, had a bit of an epiphany and went, oh my gosh, if I can access my own data and utilize this data strategically, that data will tell me a story for where my business is and what I need to do to grow my business.
Mm-hmm. So clearly there's lots of people that are, convinced, they're thinking about a digital and a data first future. So again, going back to, those skeptics, what do you tell publishers who are convinced that tech companies such as Google and Facebook are the enemy?
Yeah, I get this a lot. I think about this a lot. And I think I will just state it from the LMA point of view, which is we believe it's really important to have a very balanced point of view and perspective as a local media company about your business in totality and about your relationships with platforms. And yes, I acknowledge openly and embrace the fact that LMA works closely with Google and with Facebook and with other platforms. And we do that because we think there are opportunities for local media companies, in this case, local newspapers, to benefit from working with these companies. It doesn't mean the relationship is perfect. Google and Facebook would tell you the relationship isn't perfect. But in the case of, let's just say, Google in this project, I look at Google's business model and I look at Google's goals, knowing that team the way I do, and having them talk to me and my organization and the publishers, the members that we work with countless times, openly and honestly, about how important a healthy publishing ecosystem is to their business. And that's genuine, because Google search is adversely and negatively affected when there's a weak publishing ecosystem, and when search yields low quality content or content that isn't reputable or isn't dependable, that hurts search. And that hurts the reputation around search. And that is Google's core business overwhelmingly to this day. So publishing matters to them because it affects them in the area that affects their business most. And that's why you've seen Google articulate at the highest level from Sundar, their CEO, that it's one of their 5 OKRs as a company, is a focus on a healthy publishing ecosystem. So when that's getting articulated, we talked at the very beginning of this conversation about executive level buy-in, right? Well, Google has executive level buy-in to the importance of the publishing ecosystem. And I was at an event 2 weeks ago where Mark Zuckerberg was stating the same thing with Facebook around their investments now in quality content through the news tab. And we'll see how it plays out, but it's real money that's going into the publishing ecosystem. I say all of that not to sound like Google or Facebook's defense attorney or take a position, but simply to say it does matter to their business models. And also there are ways for publishers to work collaboratively and symbiotically with platforms for mutual gain and mutual benefit. There simply are. And to take a completely closed-minded view that platforms only injure your business versus the possibility of them helping your business, we think is an overly narrow-casted way or overly provincial way of thinking. And I think that, yeah, local media companies need to be really smart and really sensible about all of their growth strategies, all of their diversification strategies with platforms and beyond. But they also need to be really open about where opportunity exists, being willing to experiment where there is that opportunity, and also acknowledging what I think we all know is a universal truth, which is users and audience exist in droves and in very loyal and engaged ways on platforms. So we're either going to resist that truth and not make any effort to create relationships with those users, or we're going to acknowledge that truth and work with the platforms to understand how publishers and their high quality content can get found and engaged with by those users to bring them back to our brands, to create wins for their brands and also create wins for the platforms. And I think that's the balanced conversation that needs to occur and the balanced mindset that a publisher needs to take to their platform strategy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So now kind of switching gears to something hopefully a little bit lighter. I know the third report is in the works currently. How are the publishers doing? What kind of growth have they seen since they started this program?
Yeah, this is more fun, absolutely, because this is the work in progress, right? And this is ultimately, we built this 9-month program to get to this phase, which is let's benchmark, let's understand our data, let's build roadmaps, let's collaborate, and then let's go test some stuff and see if we can move the needle for our businesses. And let's see if we can grow the number of digital subscribers, or let's see if we can grow the number of newsletter subscribers, or the number of frequent visitors, or increase our retention rate of our digital subscribers. Let's see what works. Let's put these tests to the practice. So that's what's going on right now. It's still pretty early days. We're just about a month or so into that process of getting experiments finalized and launched and then learning from them. So I don't have a whole lot of data to report yet in terms of like this has happened in this area, or this much new revenue has been created through digital subscriptions. We'll have that probably early in 2020, and that's a lot of what will be in the final report. But I can tell you there are a lot of experiments underway that focus in different places on that audience journey or in different places in the funnel. We have some people that are really focused on through things like smart recirculation and user experience, driving repeat usage. They understand that getting somebody to their site 3 times a month, or for a hyper power user 3 times a week, is really critical on the path to converting them to a paying subscriber. So what are the ways that you drive frequency? Northwestern's Medill School and their local news initiative would talk about frequency of visitation being the #1 signal or indicator of subscription. So we have some tests focused on that. We have a heavy focus on the impact of newsletters and the fact that getting into a newsletter, one-to-one, known, identifiable, and personal relationship with a user through a newsletter subscription is a critical engagement step on the path to conversion. There are lots of data points out there that suggest if somebody's a newsletter subscriber, they're between 5 and 10 times more likely to become a paying digital subscriber than any other channel or referral source. So there are lots of tests around growing the size of your newsletter database or your email database. Things like somebody lands on the site and different ways of testing modals, different ways of testing messaging, different ways of putting, sort of registration walls around content or tied to a paywall that encourage overall registration with the site, but specifically sign up for a newsletter, things like that. Another area I'll identify quickly that's been really important is when somebody becomes a subscriber, you've worked so hard to acquire them. Now what? They've gone from a prospect to a customer. Now that they're a customer, what's their customer journey with you? How do they find out about your products and services? How do they start utilizing them? How do they start building habitual behavior as a subscriber? And then ultimately, what does that onboarding journey look like after the first week and after the first 30 days where you're continuing to add value to the relationship and hopefully turn them from a subscriber to a loyal subscriber and then maybe even an advocate or an evangelist for your brand to somebody that would be the next subscriber. So you can see in just what I talked about there, we've got tests going on at different levels of this funnel, from taking top of the funnel traffic and creating return engagement, newsletter engagement to drive down funnel movement towards subscription, pay flow efficiency to make sure that when somebody wants to become a subscriber, they can cleanly and easily, and then post-subscription journey to turn somebody from a new subscriber into a loyalist. Those are some key areas that we're really focused on right now.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So that is some good stuff. How are you guys getting these reports to the right audience? Are you going to be presenting them at any upcoming conferences that we can kind of look forward to? Or is it just more online type stuff going on?
I thought you'd never ask. Yeah, no, we and that's a big part of LMA's role in this. I mean, I think, Google's played a key role in this, FTI as well, but, we're a convener and an experiential learning and collaboration group at heart as a nonprofit trade association with more than 3,000 members and a bigger ecosystem beyond that. So it's really our charter and our charge to figure out how to take these learnings and get them across the industry and get them, applied by others. So we've already made multiple conference presentations, both at LMA events, at Google events, and at other industry events about the reports and about the work being done. We've done webinars, we've done other types of content, lots of newsletters ourselves, lots of social media. I mean, you name the format for engagement, we've done it. And as we move into 2020, that becomes the exciting time now to talk about the work that was actually done. What were the experiments? What did we learn? What can publishers do? How did it move the needle in key areas? And what can publishers take from that into their own businesses? And so we'll do that through presentations at the Publishers Mega Conference in February, at the Burrell LMA event in March, at other events, to be announced and to be determined. We'll have the report coming out. I'm sure we'll do other content around that. You can imagine smartly, not overdoing it, but we'll canvass the market because that is an important report to close out the work that's being done, figure out what the steps ahead are, and show people real proof of, look, when you use data, when you collaborate together, when you build the right environment internally with people, process, and technology, you can affect your digital subscription business positively and hear the results of that.
Thank you, Evelyn. That wraps up this week's edition of E&P Reports, the official podcast of Editor and Publisher Magazine. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Please share it with your social media contacts and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you watch or listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you'd like to rate and review the show, well, we'd sure appreciate that, too. I'm your Cyclopsian host, Bob Andelman, saying thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Please consider checking out my other podcast, Mr. Media Interviews, now in its 13th year at mrmedia.com. That's mrmedia.com. Let's talk, edit, and publish again next week.
This is E&P Audio, a service of Editor and Publisher Magazine. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing.